All right, good morning. I was just looking at this. Okay, I'm gonna write a number on the board. This is kind of shocking. I think a little shocking. 5. So many classes we have left, including today, right? That's it. That's so kind of sad, right? Again, I get sentimental at the end, but 5, right? Including today and including our finals, we have 5 classes left. So it's just looking at kind of the next little bit and shocking, right? We're almost there. It's almost midnight. Twins turn 10 1 week from today. Like, oh my goodness, I'm gonna have 3 like preteen girls in my house. I think I'm gonna work late or something like every day for the next like 8 years. They're also hormonal and unique, right? But those are 10. I can't believe they're gonna be 10. And I wrote this up here. This is due by tonight, right? I've been reminding you for a while, but by tonight, that final diagnosis paper is due. If you miss the deadline, remember that you can still turn it in. It's 10% off each day. So you obviously want to turn it in sooner rather than later. But if you email it to me tomorrow, you would lose 10% or like each day, right? So if you don't make that deadline, it's still better to turn it in than not turn it in. But hopefully try to make that. Are there any last questions about the final paper? Anything that you're confused about or any kind of lingering final things? I'll give you one last, like, just little suggestion, and I've mentioned it a few times. But the very first thing that I'm gonna do when I open your paper, the very first thing is I'm gonna check to make sure that it has a title page. And that it has a page that's called references. That is literally the first thing I will do. I will look at the first page and the last page and scroll through. These two together kind of capture that APA formatting piece and are worth 10 points. So if you don't have a title page, right, that follows that APA style, and you don't have a references page, you'll lose those points. So just to make sure, right, and remember all those sample papers have sample title pages, sample reference pages. There's all those resources from the Writing Center. But both of these are really like brief pages, but they're kind of key to APA formatting. So it's the first thing that I'll check for. So just make sure, again, that you have those. And on your references page, you should have your academic source and your show. And if you have more sources than that, that's fine. But at bare minimum, you should have one academic source and your show. Okay, so just kind of a last reminder. Yeah. Nope, that's all you need. It's just those two. And if you have more than that, that's fine. The way you would lose points is if you don't have an academic source, like it's like a .com or .gov, it's like something not academic, or you don't cite your show, right? But if you just have that, that's all you have to have. Anything else? Okay. So what I want to do, we're going to talk about the film, right? We spent 2 days watching a film about Army. And so what I want to do, I'm going to give you just like 2 or 3 minutes, just a few minutes, kind of partner up with the people around you and share your thoughts. What did you come up with for like a diagnosis for him? What are some of the symptoms or like criteria that you maybe bulleted on that number 2 on the first page? And then we'll talk about it together. So just find a few people around you, whatever's easy. Kind of share what you came up with, and then we'll talk about it together. Yes.
Mobilizing into filtering price. Just generally special interest in lack of fine motor skills and executive function. Really, can't find these
I don't think I was here to get a handout.
Oh, okay. It was 2 days that we watched the film. I sent out an announcement with it and the film. So, yeah, so you can listen and kind of like chime in, and everything, but yeah, it
Oh,
was
that's my
online
fault.
and everything. So if you ever miss like that, just email me and I'll be happy to send it to you. It was also on campus. So
That's how.
if you really go back and watch film
Yeah, I
and
did.
do the handout, then I would be happy to do it. Okay, so just try and get it to me by the end of the week.
Of course.
You know, so that- But it's on an announcement on campus.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
So just like another minute, then we'll talk about them together.
Outside of the really fast. Do you think a summer class is enough time to get told for this book? Class?
So like intro psych,
It would be intro to because that's the only.
Yeah.
For the summer.
so it's gonna be tough,
Okay.
but it's totally doable. But just know going in that that is probably one of the hardest classes, period. And if you take it and condense it into 4 weeks, yeah, who's teaching you? Okay, she's. So if anybody, if you could handle it with anybody, it's Mary. She loves neuro so much and it's like contagious. So I just know going in there's gonna be a lot. No, and that, and you know what, maybe it makes it easier because it's gone out of the way, but just know that it's gonna be a lot in a short time.
Because I was debating my majors for science, I figured I wanted to take.
Yeah.
So I just want to make sure you think it's okay.
I totally think it's doable, but
Okay.
it is a lot.
Okay, thank you.
But I mean, if I had to go back and take it over.
Isolating and this, like where they live, that most of the place.
Okay, and I saw that with some emails, but that's great. So if you emailed it to me.
Yeah, I don't think that's why.
Okay, that would get the email, that's fine. And so, sometime later today, if you see a zero, it was plus or
Like that.
all right, let's talk about Arnie together for a little bit. He's a really interesting character. And I think the cool thing, the thing that I like about this film, even though it's older, is I don't feel like his diagnosis is obvious. Like, I feel like we could have a debate a little bit about what we think he might have. But let's focus on number 2 together. Let's get like a list of some of the things that we wrote down that are going on with Arnie. Anyone want to give me one to start off? And I'll try and kind of shorten them a little bit. Yeah. So like poor awareness, let's say you have danger.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Right. What are some other ones? Should have a bunch. Yeah.
Ability to form certain things. I wrote down such as being himself.
Yeah.
Certain things that you know.
Okay. So maybe like struggles with some basic actions, right? He can't, we could even add, he can't care for himself. Okay, other stuff. What else we got? Yeah.
He acts inappropriately.
Okay.
Like social awareness issues.
Okay. So we'll say that. Then I don't have to spell inappropriate.
Yeah.
Okay, so social. So what'd you say? Social.
Like social awareness issues.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah.
Forget for his life attention, they're like, they'll tell him not to climb the water tower and then the next thing, he'll just forget and do it anyway.
Yeah. So do you want to put it as like doesn't listen to instructions, or what? How do we want to put that up here? Okay. So maybe we could say forgetting. Like he's not following through with like the things that he's told. Okay, yeah.
Communication deficits, he can't express himself verbally very well. Sometimes it's just limited to nonverbal.
Okay, often, non. And if I write something up here, or somebody shares something you didn't write down, by all means, feel free to add it to your paper, that's fine. What else do we have? Yeah. Okay. Other stuff? Anything else? Yeah. Okay. Mhm. So repeating, I love the term, that's wonderful. And then you kind of mentioned like impulsivity as well. They go together, but he definitely has both. Yeah.
Scripting,
Mhm.
like in order to sell suit, he would say things over and over again, or he would just say things that weren't related to any topic, so.
Okay.
I've heard it's called scripting.
Yeah. Well. All right. Anything else that we want to add up? It's a great list. I love it. Yeah.
Something that I noticed.
Okay.
The big one that I remember being the repeating of that's bad, like over and over to screen them.
Yeah.
Kind of repeating, but to this extreme of repeating that you to stop.
Okay. Struggling to. Anything else that we want to add? Yeah.
Still, like counting.
Yeah, he definitely does that. That means. Right. Trying to think if there's anything else that I wrote down. Those are a lot of the big ones. Yeah.
Social awareness, but inappropriate emotional affect.
Okay. It's a wonderful list. Anything else you want to add? That's pretty like comprehensive. Yeah.
Only added this, I think he might have,
Sure.
like, he has a special interest in, like, in grasshoppers specifically.
Okay. So like a focus, interest. One other thing with the grasshopper, like he really struggled with the idea of life and death, right? Which was interesting. Like his mom was hiding, and he killed the grasshopper, like he cut the head off, and then he was like cried that he was dead, right? And so like maybe we could add that too, like for understanding. Aren't you glad I give you slides instead of just writing on the board? If you had to copy my handwriting, I'd feel bad for you. Okay. Yeah, it could be better. It's better when I'm writing here on the chalkboard, not so much. I can't stand chalk. Like, I don't even know why we have chalkboards. Like my kids have smart boards in their classrooms and we have chalkboards. Anyway, I could complain about that for a while. But okay, so wonderful list of things we're struggling with. And this is what I'm hoping you're doing with your character, right? In your show, that you're watching the show and going like, oh, wow, look at all these things that they have. And then we can take these and try and match them up to diagnostic criteria. So if we look at number 3, right, if you flip over, don't justify it yet, but let's get a list. What are some of the things that we might diagnose Arnie with? Anyone have a diagnosis you're leaning toward? Yeah. Okay. So we put these down here. So autistic spectrum disorder. Okay, that's one. What else? Yeah.
Intellectual development disorder.
Yeah. Okay, so IDD. Let's see if we can abbreviate anything else down here, right? So we have autistic spectrum disorder, intellectual developmental disorder. Anyone have anything else, even if it's not the whole picture for him? Yeah.
I also put, but I think he also might have complex post-traumatic stress disorder.
Okay, interesting.
Like, put it together.
Right. Love it. Right. Okay. Huh, no one's ever suggested that one, but I like that. I like that. Anything else? Any other letters? We want to put ADHD up here too, just to get more letters. He has some kind of ADHD features, but I don't think that's the whole picture with him. These are really like good thoughts with him. So let's talk about why. How many of you thought maybe autistic spectrum disorder might fit Arnie in some way? Even if it's not the whole picture. A lot of you. So anyone want to explain why you were thinking? Let me go down to that one here. Why did you think autistic spectrum disorder? So instead of just autism, it's referred to as autistic spectrum disorder because it's a spectrum that people can fall on. Yeah.
The motor movements and the rigid repetitive behaviors.
Yeah. Very typical of someone with ASD, right? To do some of those behaviors. Yeah. Okay. Pretty characteristic of that. Okay. Anybody else? Why you thought autism or autistic spectrum? What, any other thoughts with that? Yeah.
He also showcases language and communication problems, like the whole goodbye thing.
Mm-hmm.
So-
Goodbye versus good night
Yeah.
and right, all of that. Okay. Any other thoughts for ASD? Anyone, why you don't, oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah. Yeah.
So like, things have changed because like I diagnosed him with like level 2 autism. Is that not a thing anymore?
No, so what they did is they reworked like the whole developmental disorder area, right? So it used to be that people could have like, they called it autism. And now what they did is they created this umbrella term called autistic spectrum disorder. And so it's basically, it's autism is what it is, but it's this idea that it exists on a spectrum like anything else. So it's interesting that they chose to do it here, but not with other stuff. And so the thought is that people could have like very mild delays versus like profound and significant ones. They also eliminated something I might ask you. They eliminated Asperger's. So if you've ever heard of Asperger's disorder, it used to be its own separate thing. It's now part of the umbrella, right? And so what they did is they just kind of absorbed it. A little controversial because Asperger's is a very distinct, very different presentation of like ASD, where people tend to be really bright, but they struggle socially. So they completely reworked like the whole developmental category. Yeah. 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 So the DSM-5 came out in 2012. And in 2012, they reworked the whole thing. And so it's been a few years now, but yeah, it's totally different.
Didn't they used to refer to it as high touch?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So they just completely got rid of it.
Right. It's no longer its own unique, distinct disorder.
Did it?
Yeah.
Because I met,
Uh-huh.
I'm married people who totally, like,
Yeah.
100%.
And I have had many students who I would 100% put them as Asperger's, right? It's usually something that's very identifiable, someone who's super bright, but they don't have those social cues, right? And so oftentimes there's a lot of inappropriate social behavior, which we have a little up here, but it wouldn't fit Arnie because he's not super intelligent, but it is, you know, controversial. A lot of people weren't very happy with that. And they also renamed ADD is no longer a thing. It's ADHD. There's no ADD anymore, right? And so, you know, they change things like that to reflect research and trends, and sometimes they end up changing them back. So we'll see what happens in the next DSM, because there wasn't a lot of agreement on that one specifically, because it is a very distinct pattern, separate from what we tend to see with autism, right? So you're not wrong, but according to them, to the experts, right, that's not what it is anymore. There's a couple of things that make me think it's not autistic spectrum disorder, right? Yeah.
So I think a lot of it does tend to line up, but there are a couple things, at least that aren't displayed as much.
Sure.
He doesn't seem to have the same focused interests that we often see in autism spectrum disorder.
Mhm.
We see some, like he does like kind of focus back on the
Water tower.
But one thing that I know of like both textbook sites and that I've seen in autistic people that I have known and friends with, is there is often a fixation, something that they
Right.
know a lot about.
Yeah.
And that a lot of their interest is focused toward. And the other thing is that they have like rigid patterns of behavior to the point where they have a routine.
Mhm.
And the disturbance of that routine is heavily disturbing and highly distressing to them.
Yeah.
And I don't see as much of that in them.
Right. And autistic spectrum disorder, ASD, can present so differently from person to person, but those are things that you traditionally see. Other things that are really common, there's often a really difficult time with any kind of touch and human interaction, right? And Arnie doesn't struggle with that, right? Like he's very touchy, he hugs people, he's very like affectionate in that way. That's not something that you often see. It's something that's very common with Down syndrome, but not something that's very common with autism. You also tend to see when we say language and communication problems, I mean, obviously it's a spectrum, but typically someone with ASD does not communicate as well as Arnie does, right? And would have a lot more problems with like schedule disruption, right? So there's some things like that that like really kind of throw me off The ASD, though, there are some things like the motor movements, the repeating, some of those things that do kind of fit as well. Yeah.
See, like, touch to or something, and then Gilbert said, oh, don't touch it, 'cause it's fun.
Oh, yeah, that's true. There is that one part, right? So again, the kind of blending, right, which I'm sure a lot of you found this in your show, right? That like your character didn't fit one thing perfectly. Hollywood loves to blend things together. Like Fight Club, for example, everyone's always like, oh, dissociative identity disorder. But it's also kind of schizophrenia, right? They blend them together to make it more dramatic and more interesting. That's so common. So there are a little bit of pieces of that. But overall, he's pretty affectionate. Yeah.
Thought the reason Gilbert was so obsessive about him not being, was so obsessive about him not being touched was to like avoid abuse.
Right. Yeah. That's kind of the tone that I got from it as well. But I think you could take it either way, right? That's the way that I took it, but I think either one would be valid. Yeah.
I thought the one thing that was interesting that made me question ASD is that I think they brought it up twice, saying that they didn't expect him to get to this age.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, ASD is not a
A
fatal.
life, like.
Yeah, it's
death
not a life
sentence.
sentence,
Mhm.
so that was one thing I was like, I
Yeah.
don't know what that's about, and they never explained that.
They didn't, right? And so when we talk about causes, like we can speculate some stuff, but yeah, having ASD doesn't mean you're gonna die early. People who do have developmental disorders tend to have a shorter lifespan, but not like 18, not like that short. But it does tend to be something that sometimes can lead to like a shorter lifespan. Let's look at IDD. So how many of you thought maybe there were some elements of IDD that fit him in some way, intellectual developmental disorder? A few of you. So thoughts on this? Why this one? Any thoughts? A few of you raised your hand. Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was like somewhere between like the fourth level IDD, profound IDD.
Mhm.
It was like he needed like close supervision and like structure with his environment. a
Yeah.
lot, Since his brother was always there watching him and all that stuff and making sure that he doesn't do things that
Mhm.
could get him into harm's way or that he doesn't get in trouble with that.
Mhm.
So that's why I thought it was like IDD.
Yeah, being cared for, right? He needs to be cared for pretty like heavily, which could fit either, right? But I think it definitely relates to this. Yeah.
And. First one talks about areas such as problem solving, thinking, abstract thinking, judgment, academic learning, and learning from experience. And I was able to see instances of those
Yeah.
displayed by my movie. And it goes on to talk about my functioning in my daily life, communication, social involvement, personal independence. And it's not that Arnie does not enjoy socialization,
Yeah.
but he is deficient in being able to communicate. And he's unable to like understand the people around him in the same way that we're normally able to like almost like subconsciously or understanding through context. Arnie simply does not view social interactions through the same lens. That
Yeah.
people are generally do.
No, I would agree.
And so I was looking through the checklist and everything seemed to line up. And I had him put as, I think I had him put as moderate, perhaps bordering on severe.
Yeah.
Maybe more to the severe side because the textbook would mention that those generally need close care and attention.
Right, which he seems to need a lot of the time. Any other thoughts with this one? Yeah. Yeah.
Gilbert was saying like, oh, next time you're gonna like take a bath in like big or something. But then like he would like try doing it and he almost like drowned.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's really beautiful.
Okay. Okay. My money, if I had to choose one, I would choose IDD, right? And I think if you said ASD or IDD, then that's fine. You can make a good case for either. The reason I would choose this, how old is Arnie most of the movie? 17, turns 18 at the end, right? He does not act like a 17-year-old, right? The fact that he does not act his age gives me this thought, right? So at times it's so while watching him and the things that he says and does reminds me of my kids when they were like 3 or 4. right? And like, I'm hiding, but you can see him in plain sight. That's something a little kid would do, right? Like, I'm hiding, you can't find me, like this, right? And you see them 100%, right? That's really common with little kids. The fact that he can't bathe himself. My kids could bathe themselves at 4. Not well, but they would know to get out of the bathtub and get a towel, right? The things that he says, his social interactions are that of a child rather than a 17-year-old. The fact that he needs to be cared for, that he has poor understanding of things could be his age. Oftentimes kids don't understand the concept of death until they're closer to like 7 or 8 years old, right? And he doesn't understand that, and he can't care for himself. He's acting very much like a very little child, despite the fact that he's like 17, 18. So as far as where we would rank him, if we had this, that's kind of up for debate. Like I would tend to kind of go between 2 and 3, because I think that he could get a lot better if he had better support, which we'll talk about in a moment, right, when we get to treatment. So you had mentioned CPTSD. Do you want to kind of, which I think you could make a case for that too. So I'm curious your thoughts.
I think his obsession with death throughout the movie was really interesting, and I think every time he went up the water tower, well, not the first time, but after that, and every time he tried to hide, there was something that happened right beforehand that upset him. And then he hid. The first time he hid, I felt like, he might not feel seen by the family because he's not being supported in the way he needs to be supported. But there's no way that he can like communicate that, but the only way he can is by behaving a certain way where everybody is paying attention to him.
Sure.
And then he only really gets minimal amount of attention from his mother, his actual mother, and that's after something really big happens. And so, I don't know, I just thought like some of these things, some of the ways that he tries to sue himself is avoidant, and a lot of times that's like, or like he wants to be found, but I just thought his hiding behavior was just really interesting, and how could it not be with a family dynamic like that? I don't think you can get out of that situation without having something. Yeah, along those lines.
Yeah, and obviously the complex PTSD part doesn't explain like several of these things, but I do think that we could consider it as like something additional.
Yeah.
And this is something, and we talked about this back in the, when we talked about PTSD and stress disorders. You know, this is something that tends to be rooted in childhood, like neglect. He could have had some trauma happen with his dad, and the family is a very kind of difficult environment. So I think you could definitely say this might be something that's going on. You could also say he might have some ADHD like things that are happening as well. He has a lot of like hyperactivity and a poor attention, but it's again, not the whole picture. Yeah.
About their dad actually, because when Gilbert hit him, he was like really like torn up about it. I wondered if his dad might have abused Arnie when he was younger.
Yeah, we
That's
could
why
wonder.
we're like so obsessed with you don't hurt Arnie. I
Yeah.
was thinking about that.
It's an interesting thought. Yeah. They were kind of vague about his dad, right? Like they give us like kind of confusing information. So if we go to number 4, some possible like contributing factors, they hint that the dad hung himself, right? He committed suicide in the basement, right? He hung himself out to dry, right? Like they are a little vague about it, but he clearly committed suicide and disappeared. And so it might have been that maybe he was violent, right? That could easily be the case. We don't know. We can guess.
Yeah, it conflicts with like how the mom sees.
Yeah.
Also, Arnie, there are like multiple shots with Arnie's feet hanging,
Mm-hmm.
and it really like invoked the imagery of their dad.
Interesting. Well, I love the symbolism, right?
Yeah.
I don't ever look for those things. I'm such a like concrete person, but I love that. I could see that for sure. Okay. What are other thoughts for like causes, contributing factors? What else might have maybe led to Arnie being the way that he is, even if we're not sure, like we can guess a little bit. Yeah.
Support. He did not have a support system.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like part of that, I can't entirely fault the children of the family because they all have to that they have to like build
Right.
to work to provide while keeping track of Arnie. His older sister is kind of functioning as the mom of the house.
Mm-hmm.
The younger sister is involved with school still. She's got education focused on. None of them can really give all the attention that he needs. and their mother is like physically unable to get up and to like handle things. So he's simply, well, I'm much with you where I think he could have been a lot better if he had a better support system and, but contributing to the level of severity, just nobody is really able in this circumstance to help him develop in a way.
Yeah, I think the family, something about the family should be on all of your lists, right? The family and that environment and the dynamics and everything going on there is definitely contributing. It might not be the sole contributor, but it's playing a role, right? It should be considered. What else? Anything else as far as like causes or contributing things? Again, even if you're kind of speculating, yeah, what do you think?
Really simply birth complications.
Sure.
Because they keep on saying like the doctors keep on saying that already will live past a certain age. So
Yeah.
he must have had like some birth complications during the start of his life.
Okay, that's a great guess, right? Again, we don't know, but it's totally possible. Yeah.
Assuming, of course, but I really think that there could have been, they didn't say when the father hung himself,
They
right?
didn't, not
Okay,
really.
But I feel like there could have been enough years of like unintentional neglect.
Sure.
And then you couple that with like this desolate scenery where you, like, it's hard to not feel alone
Yeah.
and like their house is literally in the middle of nowhere. And so there's just a lot of feelings of being alone. So I think that, I don't know, like, cause I think he definitely has an intellectual development disorder, but I think there's also emotional
Yeah.
things
I
that
would
are
agree.
going on here. That definitely the family has a big influence on, as well as the environment, because, you know, there's such thing as like seasonal depression or whatever, but I'm just saying like, it's hard to feel supported, especially when you walk out the door and you don't see anybody.
Yeah, and you're alone,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, and I love that you said unintentional neglect, because a lot of neglect is unintentional. Like people think that they're doing well, they mean well, but they just can't meet the needs of somebody, and it can be neglect, even though it wasn't intentional, right? And because I get the feeling that they're all trying, but that doesn't mean it's enough, right? Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, and it might be summer, right? Like, I get the feeling that it's summer, but still there's no mention of school whatsoever. And even if he does, it's a very tiny town. So the chance that like his school is a good school is low. I mean, they have like an ice cream place, so you could be worse, right? Like, but still, yeah.
Community didn't know how to attend to this.
Yeah. Right.
Multiple times. Finding the water tank, like after that past time, like the last time, they like threw him in jail for it. And,
Right. Yeah.
Obviously, he's not doing that in a malicious way, like it's just because of his disorder.
Yeah.
I thought that was also another part of it.
Yeah, they're not helping. They don't know how to help him. I thought that was a hand. I tend to have a thought with him too, and like that maybe he got injured when he was little. Like he climbs trees a lot. Maybe he fell out of the tree and had like an injury that stunted him, like you know, in terms of like his cognitive development. I mean, we can make lots of speculations. That's one that I tend to maybe like wonder about, just because he does have some of those delays. But wonderful, like those are wonderful, like contributing factors. How about for some of the things we could do to help him? What are some things that we could maybe do to help Arnie? Like, even if they're small, how could we help him get a little bit better? Yeah, go here. Yeah. And luckily, it seems like they moved at the end, maybe somewhere like there's more resources where they went, right? Yeah, I love that, right? So some therapy. Yeah.
I was a registered behavioral technician, so I worked a lot with ABA.
Mhm.
Even though if he doesn't have ASD, we still work with other people who had other emotional issues. So I think ABA would be really helpful, like to have someone with him that can train him on like the appropriate ways to respond to situations.
Yeah.
And to help him too, like regulate. So I think that would be really helpful.
Oh, for sure.
I've seen a lot of progression in short amounts.
Yeah, so some support in that way. I think that would be great. And that was one of my first psychology jobs as well, right? It's a great like entry level opportunity to kind of get out there and do some of that stuff. And very concrete like teaching of skills could help him a lot. Yeah.
Like, I feel like dating gets a bad rap, but honestly, it benefits so many people with like intellectual like delays and stuff like that. Like it really helped me like become the person that I am today.
Mhm.
Like, I don't know, when I was born, people thought that I wouldn't be able to drive, to talk, to like have a job, but like now because I got early intervention, I can do all those things and more.
Yeah, that's amazing, right? It can be really helpful. It does sometimes get kind of a bad reputation, but I honestly like you're intervening and helping on a very one-on-one level, which I think would benefit him so much. Yeah.
I noticed in the board meeting, Becky seemed to start to have some.
Yeah.
And I could be wrong, but I think it'll be an implication that Gilbert and are going to run off with Becky and her mother, so it might be possible that for the foreseeable future, Arnie might have a better support system in Becky, who seems to be very patient and very
Yeah.
well able to assist Arnie with his needs.
And she seemed like a good presence for him, like
She
a good
did.
grounding, like presence. She did it. She had a patience and kindness that I think, it's very easy to get tapped out with somebody who needs that much. Right. It's such a sad scene when Gilbert, like, physically like starts slapping him. But it's understandable. Like I like that they included it because it's sad and it's hard to watch. But the frustration of just constantly caring for somebody who needs so much, it can lead to that kind of stuff. So someone new who was like more patient, I think was really helpful. Schooling, right? Getting them into some school, right? You mentioned no school, right? So maybe like a really good like special ed program, some like interventions to help him out. Yeah. 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 Yeah, I think getting the family into either therapy or like at least on board with like some better ways to help push him. Because I really think that Arnie could learn to take care of himself a little bit better, right? So it's not going to be that you leave him in the bathtub once and it works, but like I leave you for 5 minutes and come back, like so little things, right? Obviously he was motivated to go be with Becky, but I think bringing the family in and teaching the family and like working with the family would make a big impact. I agree. There's another hand. Yeah.
How much can people with intellectual developmental disorder improve?
I mean, you can definitely, the focus is usually on learning skills, right? So if Arnie can't bathe himself, let's focus on teaching you how to bathe yourself, right? Like you would do with a little kid of kind of building up to it slowly. So, I mean, oftentimes there's kind of a cap and it's going to depend from person to person, but you can oftentimes work on those very concrete, tangible skills and social skills training and build somebody up a decent amount, right? It's harder when someone's in the profound category. If somebody's profoundly delayed, it might not be possible to teach those things. But if they're in the moderate area, individuals in that area can oftentimes like learn to take care of themselves and be okay, right? Live like relatively like normal lives with maybe just a little extra support.
Yeah. I think Arnie, like if we're talking about where they're at, do you see them?
Yeah.
How far do you think Arnie could improve?
I mean, it feels like he could go up to mild pretty easily if he had like some really focused interventions and training and help. Whether that would happen for him or not, it's hard to say, but I feel like he could get there, right? He seems to have like enough potential to get there, in my thought. Any other like just general thoughts, comments, anything else about the film? Anything at all before I collect them and we kind of move on? Yeah. Yeah.
Obviously, her circumstance is somewhat. So without tragedy.
Yeah.
But also it made me very frustrated to see each of her children
Mhm.
desperately trying to keep things together while also caring for her and her sitting on the couch the entire time.
Yeah.
I was not, that was one other thing that if she had stepped up for like all of them have had this track record, all of them are still doing their best to step up.
Right.
If she had been able to step up and do more, that alone might have had the benefit of just giving them just that much more
Mhm.
attention and focus.
It's a lot of responsibility to put on other children and teenagers, right? That's a lot to expect of them. And she did definitely check out in a lot of ways and create that situation. Yeah.
Gilbert was everything, all of the, so when he blew up, it was clear to me that he wasn't taking care of himself. And I feel like that was
Yeah.
reflected multiple times, especially with Becky.
Mm,
When she was like, what do you want? Like, tell me what you want as it comes to you. And everything he said was about someone else.
yeah.
And then when it finally got to him, he just wanted to be a good person.
Hmm.
And so he was trying very hard, but also with his mom, it was never enough because he wasn't. Like, he wasn't capable of taking care of Arnie in the way that Arnie should have been taken
Right.
care of, because he's just a kid as well.
Yeah.
So his mom kept on going like, it's not enough, it's not enough, it's not enough, even though she was like well-meaning. It's just like a tragic story, because like you can see the frustration in
Yeah.
like Gilbert, and he blows up.
And we could spend time diagnosing him too, right? Like, I think that he has some stuff going on from everything that's happened. So yeah, it is sad. It's the core of it. It's kind of a sad story, right? And then the mom passing at the end makes it even sadder. But what I'm hoping that you kind of took away from this is it's exactly what I want you to do in your paper, right? And where you're identifying, taking those things and being like, okay, what do they fit? And then you're arguing your like diagnosis and then talking about what could have caused it and contributed. And then how would we treat it, right? So that's exactly what I'm hoping you do in your paper. And again, if it doesn't fit neatly, which he doesn't, and a lot of characters don't, just talk about that, comment on it, and that's enough, right? You don't have to be right as long as you make a good case. All right, if you want to go ahead and hand those up, pass them up, make sure your name is on there, of course. Okay. So in the time that we have left for today, let's move on to chapter 15. So we kind of looked at childhood disorders through Arnie. Chapter 15 are disorders of aging and cognition. And so we'll look at kind of disorders toward the end of life that tend to be more common. And there aren't a bunch of them. We're going to focus mainly on like disorders of cognition. Those are the big ones for aging. But I went with the like well-seasoned end of life, like fall leaf color. My grandma used to say she was well-seasoned, right? She lived to 102. She was extremely well-seasoned by the end of her life, right? But when we're in this realm, we're talking about geropsychology. And so the study of people or working with people who are considered elderly. And in our culture, elderly is defined as 65 and beyond. Right, so people who are over the age of 65. And just like childhood and your teen years and your adult years, old age brings some special pressures, unique upsets, changes that come, so there are definitely disorders that tend to hit people who are older much more frequently than people who are younger. And we can kind of divide the disorders of aging into two groups, and we're going to focus on group 2. So the first is disorders that can affect anyone. Right, that's what we've been covering all semester: depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, right? Stress disorders that are common among all ages and can obviously affect someone who's older as well. So we've been covering those. But what we'll focus on are the disorders of cognition that tend to target people who are older. And so these are things like Alzheimer's and Lewy body dementia and a few others that we'll get to in a minute. So again, lots of different things here. So just in that first category, again, depression, anxiety, substance abuse, schizophrenia, like those things can affect anyone at any age. One just kind of side note here, though, very common for people who are older to abuse substances in one category, right? And I give you a little clue up here, it's prescription medication. Very common for people 65 and older to abuse prescription medications more than any other type of substance. And I see this a lot, right? In like grandparents and in like relatives that I have, it's this like, I know better than the doctor mentality because I'm older and I'm wiser. I do what I think is best for me. Or it could be like going from doctor to doctor trying to get medications. It could also be forgetting that you took a medication and taking it twice. That happens a lot as well, which is why a lot of people, when they get older, tend to use these pill boxes to help them remember, right? Did I take it or not? If it's in there, you didn't. If it's not, you didn't, right? So it tends to be a common thing that people who are older abuse prescription medications. It's the most commonly abused thing by people who are over 65. My mother-in-law takes 8 Advil when she has a headache. 8, right? And it's not even always Advil. It's like she has her own, like she calls it her concoction, and it frightens me. Like the other day I had a headache and we were at softball and she's like, oh, here I have some Advil. She's like out of her pocket, just drugs. And I'm like, I don't know what those are. I'll wait till I get home, right? It's always just like some cocktail of like Motrin, Tylenol, and Advil. And she just pops them in and like takes them. Like I would say on average, she takes like 10 to 15 of them a day, right? And it's just over time, it has like escalated to that, and that can happen as well. So really common to see that in people who are older. What we're more interested in are the disorders of cognition. And sadly, these are really common among people who are older. Let me erase this for a moment so I can some stuff up here. Erase this chalkboard. I'm not bitter. They've been promising for like 2 years that we're going to get whiteboards. What's that?
These chalkboard shows in this.
They're not too bad, right? It could be way worse. So we can talk about like a distinction here, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on delirium, but there are conditions known as delirium or being delirious. And then there are things that are known as more like dementia or neurocognitive disorders. So delirium and then dementia, which are now called neurocognitive. So they renamed these a few years ago. So dementias are called neurocognitive disorders now, right? And so with delirium, this is something that tends to come on very, very quickly. It has a very fast onset. When someone is delirious, it's like they have no idea where they are. There's like a confusion that comes, they can't concentrate, oftentimes can't follow a sequence of thought. This is often something that results from like a medical condition. Like maybe someone has a really high fever and they become delirious and can't think straight. Or they have like a stroke or a seizure, and following that, they're in a delirium. Or someone has a surgery and they get an infection and it causes them to be delirious. Not uncommon for someone to go in for a surgery and then have a period of time where they're saying random stuff, they're not lucid, they're out of it, they don't know where they are. That would be usually a delirium, right? It's something that's kind of fast onset, and then it's easy to correct or fix. If you can identify what caused it, right? So if somebody has a high fever, bring the fever down, the delirium goes away. Someone has an infection, you treat the infection, it goes away, and they're no longer delirious, right? So it's something that tends to happen very quickly, and it's easy to fix, easy to correct, as long as you can identify what caused it. The dementias or the neurocognitive disorders have a very slow onset. They start out very mild and they build over years, getting worse and worse and worse. And sadly, as it stands right now, they're either difficult or impossible to correct or fix. A lot of the neurocognitive disorders, like Alzheimer's, for example, is the most common one, are fatal, right? They just get slowly worse and worse and worse until they claim somebody's life, right? And we have things that we can do to slow them in the early stages, but sadly no like cures or treatments. We're working on it pretty aggressively, but there's nothing right now that will reverse it. So just kind of a distinction to make these dementias or neurocognitive disorders that we're going to talk about next are very slow and they just progressively get worse over time. Right? And by far, the most common one is Alzheimer's, right? I imagine a lot of you have known somebody who struggled with Alzheimer's, right? Maybe know or knew somebody. Very common after the age of 65. Kind of a sobering statistic, 1 in 10 people over the age of 65 will get Alzheimer's. It's a disorder of aging, right? The way that this disorder works is these neurofibrillary tangles and senile plaques build up over time, and they just hit a critical level that tends to interfere with thought and cognition and ability. So sadly, this is something that is very common, and this is the most common dementia by a mile, named after Alois Alzheimer, who recorded the first case of it back in like 1906 or something like that, I want to say. But with this, it's typically from onset to death, an average of 8 to 10 years. And it starts out very slow, like little mishaps in memory, little slips of the tongue, little like I can't think of the word, can't remember where I put something. And then it slowly progresses to personality changes, forgetting later, like earlier and earlier and farther back. It can be a very challenging disorder, not only for the person, but for the people in their life, right? The people who care for them. Right? How many of you have known someone who struggled with this at some point? A lot of you, right? Speaking of things that are sad, this is a very sad heart disorder, right? In a lot of ways. Any like comments or stories or things to share? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But she was really mean for her whole life, and then as it started progressing, she became like the nicest one ever. I'm like, you used to be like, you were the reason we didn't go to Thanksgiving. Like, you were so mean, and then now she's like, she was just like, what, like just the sweetest person ever. I'm like, who are you?
Right? How funny.
Yeah.
And early 50s like that, very uncommon, right? The earliest documented case, it was a 19-year-old. Okay, now that is extremely unlikely and rare. There were probably 19-year-old, like, and it's likely that there were other things going on. If this happens before the age of 65, it's considered early onset and it tends to be genetic. If it happens after 65, it's just considered a disorder of aging. So this isn't necessarily genetic unless it happens when somebody is like in their 50s or like very early 60s. Anybody else? There are a lot of hands here. Mhm.
Sit there and not respond.
Yeah, and that can be the case usually kind of toward the end of someone's life, right? That they kind of become unresponsive to the world around them. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah. Uh-huh. Both of them. Oh, geez. Yeah.
His grandma, they were really close. And when she was diagnosed and had gone really bad, he was the only person that she would let take care of him.
Mm-hmm.
So that started impeding like his schooling and stuff. So his grandparents ended up moving to Florida to live with his aunt. And like a few months ago, we went to Florida to visit, and the way he like talks about it, he always says like, oh, she's not like there, she doesn't remember anything, she doesn't remember like using.
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, yeah, and I came in and heard me say, hi, grandma, and she remembers.
Oh, yeah. And that's the tough thing with this is like there can be pockets of lucidity. Like, so somebody could forget entirely who you are. And then all of a sudden they remember, and it's like all their memory is there, everything is back. And then 5 minutes later, it's gone again. Right. And so sometimes that makes it, I think, kind of cruel, but then you can enjoy those like little moments where it's still there. My dad passed from Lewy body dementia, but they thought it was very similar to Alzheimer's. And like toward the end of his life, like he forgot my mom, right? They had been married like 25, 30 years at that point. And it was like the cutest thing. You have to find like the sweet things and like the little things in life, right? He asked my mom at one point, and I was standing right there. It was really memorable to me. Like, did I ever get married? Like he looked at my mom and was like, hey, did I ever get married? And she's like, yeah, like to me. And it was the sweetest thing. His face lit up and he was like, oh, hi, right? Like he was like all like excited, like, because it could have gone a totally different way, right? But he like his face lit up with that like, "Hey, how you doing?" Right? Like, what are you up to? Right? It was so cute. Like, and he would laugh about it. He'd be like, on the plus side, I can reread books as often as I want. Like when he would have like moments of lucidity, he's like, it's new every time, right? My dad had a great sense of humor. But it's so hard. The older or like the longer that somebody has this, the worse the memory tends to get, right? And so like toward the end of his life, like he would forget my name and my brother's names. He would confuse us all the time. He would forget my mom. And that tends to be the case. It kind of progressively goes backward at the longer that somebody has it. And then sadly, at the end of life, what happens is like your body shuts down. It's like your body forgets how to function. And something really small, like a cold, can take someone out because their body can't fight it off anymore. Yeah.
My grandma takes care of her. She's like younger than the elderly people. But one of them has dementia. Like some form of dementia, might be Alzheimer's, I'm pretty sure it is. But she lives with her husband. Her husband is like really active. He like gardens and all that. He's like he's a baby boomer, so he's like all doing everything. And then but his wife, the one with Alzheimer's, is like has forgotten everything. Except for when they play certain music. Or like Christmas comes and she'll say like Merry Christmas and they communicate.
Yeah.
Or they'll like play a song that they used to know and she'll like come alive.
Mm-hmm.
And I heard that's because like music is a different type of memory.
Yeah.
Than the rest of our.
Yeah. And sometimes some music and sometimes smells, like certain smells can trigger somebody back into like clear memories. Because smell memory is like its own thing as well. But yeah, music tends to activate a lot of different parts of the brain, and there tend to be a lot of associations with music. So a song could trigger something in a way that maybe other things might not, right? So yeah, sometimes those little things can be used to help, right? As somebody gets like farther along into this. Yeah.
So the rest of my family lives out in the UK and my grandpa has Alzheimer's and he'll forget how long it's been since we've been to visit them.
Okay.
And so it'll be like a year since we've seen him and he thinks that we came yesterday
to
see him. But
you're like, yes, I did. Yeah. Uh-huh. Right.
All of the songs.
Yeah. Isn't that funny?
We sit down, play them all. But if I say, hey grandpa, like I'm talking about something that I did at school, and he's like, you're in college? You're not in high school? And I'm like, no, I graduated high school.
Yeah. And memory is wild. Like, and you probably, I know a lot of you, if not most of you, took intro psych, but the brain has so many different parts that store memories, right? That we don't have like one memory center. The hippocampus tends to play a big role in memory, but our memories are stored so much throughout the brain that different things like music or like different abilities might be kept longer than like the more explicit type memories of who's who and who's doing what. Yeah, memory is a really interesting thing. And with this disorder, what happens is, again, these tangles and plaques build up, which happens with everyone as we age, but they interfere with neurons communicating with each other, which starts to cause problems with memory. And then again, the worse it gets, the longer it lasts, the more it tends to like accelerate. And dopamine plays a big role in this too, as well as acetylcholine. There's a lot of neurotransmitters that play a role. And you can't actually diagnose this with 100% certainty until someone has died, right? And you do like an actual like examination of their brain, but you can often see it on like PET scans or fMRIs. Their brain doesn't light up the same way that you would expect, right? There's a lot of like inactivity in the brain. And it tends to be something, again, that, you can see it, but you can't diagnose it 100%. Was there a, yeah, give it
Also was experiencing this, but something I find interesting is that she'll swear that she has a memory that never happened. Like I would be talking to my brother, like, I can't wait to see this movie or whatever. And she's like, yeah, I saw that. I'm like, no, it's not out yet. She's like, no, I saw it. She would be so like,
how was it?
Yeah. And she like forgot all of her recipes and she doesn't have any of it written down.
Yeah.
So it's like, that's really sad.
Right.
Because that was like, she was a homemaker. That was her like identity. So all of that, well, I'm just happy that I'm able to like cook for her now.
Yeah.
It makes her happy, but it's definitely
It's really hard to watch. And you see somebody like who was at some point like really capable, you know, kind of lose that capability. And it feels like there's a stage where it gets easier for the person who has it. Like in the first few years, it's mild and they can cope with it. But then there's a couple of years in there where it's that like I'm still aware of what I used to be, but not what I and what I am now and what I can't do. And that's by far the hardest stage. And in the later stages, people have forgotten that and they need to be taken care of, almost reverting back to like a childlike level of care. And that tends to be a little easier because they don't have as much awareness that they've lost that capacity. I mean, easier relative term, but still.
Stage there can be like really, they can have really aggressive tendencies.
Yeah.
Because they just swear that they can do it and they're upset people are treating them in a certain way, but it's like, we're just here to help, you
Right.
know?
Yeah, and personality changes and anger can come out of nowhere. Like it's fun that you were saying that you know your aunt got nicer. It's often the case that people get like violent and aggressive because they're confused and scared, and they kind of don't have that filter anymore. There are some other neurocognitive disorders. Lewy body dementia is number 2, second most common, right? But Alzheimer's, like I said, by a mile is the most common one. The big difference with Lewy body dementia is that people tend to have more like hallucinations and motor issues. So oftentimes kind of seeing things that aren't there and hallucinating. My dad, as I mentioned, had this. And like we were there and like my kids were swimming in the pool and he out of nowhere started screaming that my daughter Paisley was drowning. And like I was literally holding Paisley, like she wasn't drowning, it was fine, but he like freaked out, jumped in the water to try and save her. He saw her drowning, right? And it was really scary for him and for everybody else. And so there tends to be like hallucinations that come with this, and people toward the end of life, they shuffle, right? And like people who are older tend to like shuffle a little bit anyway, but there tends to be like a lack of movement. It starts to affect your ability to walk. And so you see people needing a cane to walk or a walker kind of toward the end. Right. These other ones, vascular or neurocognitive disorder, comes from like a vascular incident, right? So somebody having like a stroke or something like that, or a blood clot can cause dementia to occur. These ones these two are really rare. Pick's disease and Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. It's caused by this really like rare slow acting virus. And Pick's disease, little holes form in the frontal lobe of the brain. They're both pretty rare, but there are other ones that occur. These are a little more common, Huntington's and Parkinson's, which have more like movement and tremor related things. And these ones tend to have a very strong genetic component. So you can often test for them to see if you're going to be vulnerable to them. Yeah.
What do you do if they find out that you are vulnerable like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot you can do. You can try to do preventative efforts, right? So we'll talk about like with early intervention stuff, like if you find out that you are kind of doomed or destined to get it, which isn't accurate all the time. So that's like the worst scenario, right? You find out you're going to get it and you're not. And so oftentimes what that just means is taking better care of yourself. Diet, exercise, sleep. Sleep is a huge protective factor. And so is like diet. We're seeing more and more that diet is thought to play a role in Alzheimer's, right? The things that people eat or don't eat rather. So like working on that kind of stuff, you can't stop it, but you might be able to delay it. Like, and that's one of the like encouraging things is the things you do to take care of yourself can delay these to the point where you might not ever have it happen to you, depending on how long you live, but you can't stop it in a sense. Kind of cool, related to this. There was a video, it's like 3 years old or so at this point. But it talks a little bit about those plaques and tangles. So I want to play part of it for you. And what I love about this is they're talking about some of the ways they're trying to cure or target this disease. And again, there's a lot of research being done because it affects so many people. That study is actually now in human trials. And there's a lot, like a couple of years ago, they came out with like a newer treatment that is showing a lot of like effectiveness. And so this is something that is being focused on heavily. Again, just because the sheer number of people who get this disorder, there's a lot of research being done here. So what we'll do on Monday is we'll talk a little bit more about this. We'll kind of wrap up this chapter, and then we'll move to chapter 16, which is forensic psychology. I think it's kind of a fun one. don't forget that the final paper is due tonight. Please don't forget to turn that in. Again, if you miss it, better late than not at all. Have a wonderful weekend and I will see you all on Monday.
Okay, okay.